This set of slides looks at pension liability risk. So pension assets exist to offset the benefit promises made by plan sponsors to participants and beneficiaries. It's the pension liability. It follows that pension investment policies should be set in a way that explicitly integrates the exposures of the pension liability. Traditional approaches to pension investing exclude the liabilities exposures, which has resulted in portfolios that may be appropriate in an asset-only framework, but are exposed to unrewarded risk when evaluated relative to liabilities. Efficient investment policies can be designed and thus unrewarded risk avoided if the exposures of the liability are explicitly integrated into the investment framework. So the investment framework allows for an economic liability, and assets that mirror the economic liability, i.e. the benchmark, are considered low risk. So in this investment framework, we allow for the economic liability, and that framework fundamentally changes the picture in that the assets that mirror the economic liability, which becomes the investment benchmark, are considered low risk. Table 1 shows the fundamental differences between designing policies with an asset-only perspective versus a liability-relative perspective. Clearly, in a liability-relative space, the liability now takes center stage. Unfortunately, there is no investable asset that perfectly mimics the exposures of the pension liability. As a result, we must create the investment benchmark by constructing a portfolio of assets that best mimics the liability. If the plan sponsor defines risk as the risk that assets will not hedge the liability over the next year, then we must focus on short-term market-related liability exposures. This has been the focus of most advisors by using a portfolio of long-duration bonds to proxy the liability. For the relatively healthy company with an ongoing plan, risk is both the short-term volatility of plan costs and the long-term risk of pension assets being insufficient to offset the liability. Hence, liability modeling must deal with both horizons, and in particular, it must address the question of what the liabilities will look like in the future and how can we best hedge them as they evolve. So, decomposing the pension liabilities, they can be the value of the liability can be determined by discounting the expected benefit payments. And the discount rate must reflect the market-related exposures of the benefit payments. The extent and causes of the uncertainty in pension benefits vary by demographic group. And modeling the variations in estimated benefits is easiest by decomposing the benefits into demographic groups whose benefit levels are driven by different exposures. So we segment them into market-related exposures and non-market-related exposures. So when we turn our attention to modeling the benefit payments and understanding their inherent fundamental and economic exposures, we find out what the drive of the interest rate. We can select the interest rate that we're going to use for discounting. Pension benefits are not known with certainty. They exhibit volatility attributable to volatility in wages, in inflation, and many non-market related factors, or growth is attributable to future service costs, new entrants, and other non-market related factors.